My name's Tracy McEwen and I'm the Vice President of WATAC. And I'd like to really warmly welcome you here tonight. So although we're meeting virtually, we continue to acknowledge the traditional custodians that have for thousands of years walked upon and cared for the lands on which we were all individually located today. So I acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land where I am, the Tarawal people, and I ask you to do the same in the chat. So if everyone wants to put the name of the traditional custodians of the land, they are on the chat.
Ghana in South Australia, Adelaide area.
So if we just write it in the chat function, just down the bottom of your screen, you'll see the word chat, and you can just type it in there. And together, if we can acknowledge the continued deep spiritual attachment and relationship of the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples to this country and commit ourselves to an ongoing journey of reconciliation. So just before we begin the meeting as such, I'm just going to share a couple of slides with you. So I just wanted to let you know that Zoom meetings are public spaces, and we'd suggest that people take care when speaking of their own experience. This is not a space where WATAC can support disclosures or provide ongoing or appropriate assistance. So I've got the slides out of order. So we're committed to making this event accessible and productive for everyone, and we don't tolerate harassment in any form. So be constructive in your questions and discussions, particularly in the breakout rooms. And that's what I was going to say, what I said before, that Zoom meetings are public spaces, and we suggest people take care when speaking of their own experience. So we can't support disclosures, but there's some numbers there. If something comes up that you're uncomfortable about or you need assistance with, there's some numbers there, and we'll share those numbers again at the end of the meeting. And and we normally stay around for a few minutes afterwards. So now I've got all that out of the way, I'll stop sharing my screen and I'll just pass you over to Andrea, who's going to begin with a prayer tonight.
Thank you, Tracy. Sorry, it's just taking a moment to come up to the right view. So I'll just read the lines in plain text, and please remain on mute, but please make the response in bold print. Let's just take a moment of silence before we pray together. God of mystery, who shares divinity with us. O God of mystery, who shares humanity with us. O God of mystery, who unsettles and inspires us. Amen.
And I think I probably should have had that moment of quiet before I tried to do the safety slides. I feel a lot more centered now, and I'm ready to introduce and pass you over to Danielle Lynch, who's going to be our facilitator for tonight. So I can see there in the participant list, Danielle. So if you want to unmute yourself and take over from here.
Thanks, Tracy. Sorry, everyone, I was bouncing out of another tutorial straight into this one. So welcome, everyone. I'm Danielle. I'm Secretary of WATAC. So you probably had some communication from me in some form or another. And it's my great pleasure to introduce Elisa and Debbie to you today, because we've had some good chats already. I've been privileged to be part of a couple of conversations with them about synodality. And I think we're in for a treat today. So just before I introduce them, just to say, I know you put some really excellent questions as you registered. We'll try to get through as many of them as we can, but we do only have the hour, so we'll kick off as soon as we can. So let me introduce you to Alyssa first. Alyssa is a theologian, and she has a deep interest in community and what it means to be church. Having been baptized at 22, she has since then been seeking, and in the last 20 years has studied theology, raised 4 children with her husband Philip, and served in ecumenical and interfaith fields, and also contributed to parish life and academic and education audiences. And she's currently working with the Sisters of Mercy on a theology program in PNG in the Solomon Islands. And she has just finished a doctorate on synodality and authenticity. So welcome, Alyssa. And Debbie Edwards is a pastoral worker in Victoria and works for 2 parishes, or has worked for 2 parishes in the last 13 years, serving under parish priests with different approaches to their roles, which I'm sure we all appreciate. And she has said she surfed the shifting challenges of parish life, from bushfire and sexual abuse to the peaceful awards that ministry in a parish can bring. So Debbie is married with 6 children and 6 grandchildren. And she says she lives with a practical approach to God's presence, a great appreciation for the risen Jesus, who laughed, cried, and negotiated living and dying just as we do. So welcome also, Debbie. I wonder if we can start off by just talking about what this synodality thing is. So we gathered here to talk about synodality. Maybe Alyssa, we'll go to you first. What do you think for you synodality is?
Oh, thanks, Danielle. And I have to remind everyone that I'm speaking as a Catholic, so I'm really aware that as I've spoken with other Christians about synodality, we often have, quite a different perspective of what it means. So at this point in time, synodality is really personified by Pope Francis. Really what he's drawing out of the context of today is really coming out of Vatican II, out of his own experience in, he's coming from Argentina, and really looking at what we say, the signs of the times for today. So I've written down a few things that I've sort of gleaned from synodality in my own work. And if you listen carefully to the words of Pope Francis, he often repeats a lot of these things. He's really trying to bring home the message of what synodality is. And so firstly, I'd say it's very relational. Okay, this is a perspective on who we are as church and who we say we are. That's very much about our relationships. It's as he says, building bridges and not building walls. So Vatican II, you might be familiar with Pope John 23, who was inspired to run this council in the 60s. And he said, let's open the windows to the church and let in some fresh air. And the word was, let's update it, the aggiornamento. Let's go back to our roots, ressourcement. And it really brought in that fresh air that we hadn't had for a long time. Now, I feel like Pope Francis has taken that and he's just looking ahead. He's not looking back. So really, what do we need to move into the future? So some of the key words I've said, what did I just say? Building bridges, journeying. So that the word synod itself comes from walking together. And I love this one because it shows us that as a Catholic, I can walk with my family, I can walk with my neighbours, I can walk with the soccer club. It's a really inclusive imagination. So that's why I'm involved in ecumenical, which means working with other Christians, and interfaith work, because this is language that includes everybody. And if you go bigger, you want to walk with and appreciate the earth itself and all of the creatures that are on the earth. So it's sort of as expansive as you want to make it, this vision of Pope Francis. So some of the other words that I keep hearing from him are hospitality, that idea of being able to walk into a place and feel like you're really welcome. that you can be who you are. And I can see from, I've printed out this list of wonderful questions that people submitted when they registered. And so much of it is about feeling like you belong, feeling like you're respected, and that you're listened to. Another aspect that I hear is the word encounter. The idea that when we meet someone, we want to genuinely meet them. We want to welcome them and understand who they are as a person. And, you know, this is personified by Jesus. This is the example that we want to be like when we meet other people. We want to listen. We want to touch them. We want to be part of that healing ministry that may be as simple as simply listening to someone. And then I'll move on to the other important one that really came out of Vatican II. That's the concept of dialogue. That in a way that we're doing tonight, let's approach all of our encounters as an opportunity to learn from someone else, to simply listen, and then later on reflect on what was that meeting? What was I upset about something? Was there something that I need to think about for a bit longer? Did I learn something? Maybe I can change my mind because of that encounter with that person. So dialogue is a wonderfully deep concept for synodality. And I might like to throw over to Deb, because as much as I'd love to lecture to you, we'd love to have a conversation. And Deb's such a wonderful, grounded person who does the hands-on work in the parish. So I've been talking about Pope Francis. I wanted to know if what Deb's thoughts were with Pope Francis and synodality.
Well, as I'm listening to you, I'm hearing you describe a family. And realistically, being a worker in a parish means that you become part of people's families. And in keeping with that theme tonight, I've got the baby next door who's crying, not my baby, my granddaughter, and making noise. And I've got all sorts of shuffling behind me, so I do apologise if it's a bit noisy. I think in the little spiel that Danielle gave, I said that I see a practical approach to Pope Francis's dreamings, if that's what they are. And I think that's what we're all about with synodality in the church, is dealing with real people, with real difficulties, with real personalities, with real clashes, and with real companionship. So in my experience, I think you can talk all you like, but practicality on the ground is where it's at. So.
That's a great perspective. And I'm interested that what I'm hearing from both of you is it's about the church as its members, the body of Christ. So church not as an institution, but church as it's the people who make up this thing that we call church. And the encounter with the other, meeting someone where they're at. And Alyssa, I think you noted towards the idea of, how do people have a voice? How do they feel like they're heard? How do people feel like their opinions are respected? And sometimes we call that the principle of subsidiarity in the church, that idea that everyone's voice is accounted for at the lowest possible level that we can go to in terms of a hierarchical structure. How do you see that principle relating to synodality?
Yes, and that's a really important one for Pope Francis, and it's really related to where he's come from in Argentina. But I just want to start with the start of what you said there, Dan, about we as the body, we see ourselves as the body of Christ. That's what the church is. I find that can be a really empowering statement to give to people if you've sort of got caught up with the hierarchical thinking. And that's really what we're trying to break out of. And that's what synodality is. And I've written 100,000 words about it. The hierarchical mindset that says the church is a fortress. Our imagination is so stunted when we are in the hierarchical mindset, that there are certain types or certain roles of people who have the power and the authority. and we've really conformed ourselves to that. Synodality, you know, the ideal that what we're working towards is breaking out of that and reminding ourselves of the, you know, the authority that comes from our baptism, that we are baptized into the church as church, and there has to be some way for that to be lived really authentically, whoever you are as a Catholic. So, you know, the ultimate inclusivity that says you're all valued, you're all valuable, you are all the church. So in terms of subsidiarity, this is a word, I was thinking of an example of subsidiarity. So I thought of my family, because as Deb does, I'm sure, I often come back to bring my ideas back to reality. I think about my own family. So if we had a department of families in the government and they gave us all the rules that we need to live by, everything's provided, where we send our children to school, whether or not we're allowed to pray at the dinner table, what transport we're allowed to catch, all of that, all of the decisions are made for us. Now, obviously families are different and that would be completely intolerable. So what we do instead is the decisions that should be made by the family are made by the family. Actually, we know our kids best. We know which school is appropriate. And that sort of process is called discernment. Not a word we often use in the church, but I know that religious use it a lot. Pope Francis uses it a lot. Really deep meaning, where we use our experience, we use our intelligence, we consult, we use expert advice to come to our best decision, and prayer. So we can discern as a family, but then there are some things that need to be done by our government. We can't run a Medicare system for my family by ourselves. We can't run the bus system that takes my kids to school. So there are things that need to be managed at a different level. So for the church, of course, what is it that should be done at the parish level? What is appropriate for a parish to discern together? So again, we shouldn't be hierarchical thinking. We don't dump everything onto our priest. We don't dump everything onto the bishop. So what's appropriate for a parish? What's appropriate at the next level? And for synodality, it should feed up, absolutely. But what comes down should be the fruit of everything that comes up. So Deb, you know, we think too of parishes that have been abused, and all the work that someone like Deb does for an abused parish. Some things really work. But who's listening? How do we get that information out to another parish so that instead of suffering, they can have some sort of healing? Did you have anything to say about that, Deb?
Well, I think linking in with other parishes and attempting to talk to other parishes about all sorts of issues has been an interesting experience for me, actually, because particularly with the movement of the Catholic Church forward with a different vision from Archbishop Comensoli, I've had the chance to talk to a few other staff members in different parishes about which face all sorts of different problems to the ones that I've been in. And I think that ability to talk to each other is really critical, because we're like little isolated ships. We are little cabins on a ship. I think the Catholic Church is the Catholic little c Catholic Church of the world is like a giant ship moving forward under the captaincy of the Holy Spirit, but it's got all sorts of other crew on it as well. So we're all locked in little cabins, and we all have experiences that we can share with each other and just pass information backwards and forwards and brainstorm between different parishes. And I think that hasn't been happening. When you make it happen yourself, when you take that initiative, you can perform wonderful things. And if nothing else, you don't feel that you're alone, which is excellent. because staff in parishes can feel quite locked in a cabin. You know, they have their own little world, and they have the priest that they are working with, and he will come with his own form of spirituality, his own approach. And very often you do get isolated. So I think that ability to speak together is excellent. And I think, at least from what I can glean from future meetings, at least Archbishop Comensoli, I can't comment on the rest of Australia, seems to be trying to bring people together to try to talk to each other as parishes. That's good.
I'm loving the many analogies that remind us that we're not on our own, despite the fact sometimes our parish life or the different communities we're involved with can seem like they're isolated, that either, you know, you're on the ship together or we're sitting around the family dinner table together. How do we bring the different voices into that space? I wonder, Deb, if I can come back to you and ask what you see as women's place in that. You've mentioned the priests a couple of times. What role do you see women having?
I'll give that to you, Deb.
I see people. I don't actually see, I like to think of the right person in the right position. I don't want to see, you know, some sort of quota because we need so many women. I want to see people with skills, people with talents being used in the best way possible. And I think that's something you can organise at parish level, because you're always on the lookout for people with potential and people with that Spirit of God that's really gripping them. And sometimes it's a bit like Jonah, they don't want to go, but you can encourage the right people to move forward, whether they be men, they be women. Lay people in general have got so much to give. They just need to be given that little nudge, but also that opportunity to use their skills. And that's a challenge sometimes. So I've worked with lots of different priests over the years. I've been a cradle Catholic and I've witnessed a lot of different styles of parish. It's easier with some hierarchical structures than it is with others. It's a problem for us all, but it's also a great source of potential for us all.
And Alyssa, you know, women are often an important member of the family table. If you're thinking in a family sense, you know, that hospitality. What about for you? Where do women fit for you in the synodality process?
Oh, look, that's a challenge, and I'm a bit challenged by Deb's words. Of course, she's thinking of the parish, but I often have a lot of work with what we might say the hierarchical structure of the church, and the thought that we shouldn't have quotas. I go, maybe in some places I think we need to. I was once at a meeting, and this statement really stuck with me. It was we had people around the table from different Christian churches. They were all ministers except for myself, because normally they're the ones who represent their denomination. And someone really quizzed the Anglican priest. They said, you know, you've been in this for a while with women priests. How's it really going? What do you really think? And he didn't say what I expected. He said, you know, when we have meetings and there's not a woman in the room, I feel like there's something missing. And it really struck me, because we haven't got to that point in the Catholic Church. We haven't got to the point where when there's a meeting of priests or bishops or cardinals, they don't feel like there's something missing. They feel quite comfortable. So, you know, we still got that really hard work of making people feel uncomfortable, making our leaders feel uncomfortable by simply having a woman's presence. And I have to say, there are things happening. I've just written down a few headlines from the Catholic Church that I hope if you know, one thing I really want to encourage people is to follow the news, to read, to sign up to, you know, some really excellent journalists, whether you follow them on Twitter or if you subscribe to something like the America magazine in America, run by the Jesuits, or La Croix, or Zenit.org gives news from the Vatican. Just just read stuff. And I'm sure that's why you're here. You're all desperate to learn and so on. So some of the headings that I've read recently. I've got to move my little documents around. The German Archbishop pledges to name a pastoral minister for the LGBT community. The ministries of lector and acolyte are open to women. A woman is appointed as advisor to the Secretariat of the Synod of Bishops, and she is now a full member and a voting member at the next Synod of Bishops. This, like 10 years ago, you would have thought the church would break in half if that happened. A layman is appointed head of the Vatican's Commission for Latin America. The Synod of Bishops' next assembly topic is synodality. There'll be plenty of women speaking at that. The Church in Latin America has established an ecclesial conference of the Amazon. This is what really excites me, because it's not a conference of bishops, it's a conference of the ecclesia. Like, the people, the church, have a conference and the bishops have a conference. It's a body, not so much a meeting, but it's a body who have meetings and discuss topics. This is obvious stuff that we've never done as church. The church in Australia will have a plenary council for the first time in something like 87 years. The church in the US hasn't had a plenary council for well over 100 years. The Council of Trent said we should have plenary councils every 3 years. Every nation should be having plenary councils every 3 years. That was said 500 years ago. So it's actually part of our solution to being church is to hold meetings. And this was something I really wanted to talk about, is that being a synodal church, if you're thinking about synods and meetings, has to happen at every level, and it has to happen regularly. So pastoral councils in your parish, synods in your diocese. How often has your diocese had a synod? Perhaps you might like to ask your bishop about it. How often has your national church had a plenary council? This is the official structure where that conversation goes up and down. So my hope for the plenary council in Australia is the Melbourne Archdiocese will hold a diocesan synod. How great would that be? So it won't solve anything, but maybe we'll get some more voices, we'll stir some things up and actually have some conversations. And the beauty is, of course, we don't have to be in the room. We've got the internet, right? We can have these conversations with great groups like WATAC. And I would go on too much if I keep talking.
No, it's great. You're giving me great hope, and your enthusiasm certainly is inspiring, and we're getting glimpses there of the ways in which the church, the Catholic Church at least, is moving. And as we begin our question and answer session, I invite you to put any questions you've got into the chat, and we'll get as many of them to Alyssa and Deb as we possibly can in the time we've got remaining. A question that came up a few times in the pre-registration questions was the concern with the process of synodality and how this notion of synodality can be a helpful way forward. Because as we know, women, other minority groups like LGBTQ+ people, often lay people, don't actually have any final decision-making powers in the hierarchical structure of the church. So I wonder, Alyssa and Deb, if you could begin with a few words maybe as to how you see synodality as a way forward, given that environment in which the church is currently existing.
Thanks, Dan. I might go ahead here, if you don't mind, Deb, and just acknowledge that we still do have different understandings of what synodality is, and it's often, you just hear it, it's a bit of a buzzword now, and it seems like some ideal, airy-fairy. It's not even connected with, as you say, the reality of our day-to-day life, where we're not listened to, not acknowledged. We may have 20 years of theological experience, but gosh, the parish priest doesn't want to talk to me. We all have those sort of experiences. So what are we talking about? Who's going to listen to us? Okay. There are three elements to synodality that I have been researching and paying attention to. The first one is our ecclesiology. And I'm going to say this is the most important. This is our imagination. It is our communication. It is our self-understanding of who we are as church. If we only think of ourselves as a hierarchical pyramid, the Pope, the bishops, the people, it tends to infiltrate. And that's where we live at the moment. That's where we are. That's how we think the church is. If we change that, as we are doing now, by seeing each other as valued church, by acknowledging the gifts that others have, the value of listening and dialogue. This is informed by a theology that is really ancient and yet sort of often neglected. We're all baptized, okay? So we all have authority to speak and be heard, and we have the right to live authentic, Catholic, Christian, whatever your denomination is, to be the best that you can be. The sacramental life, the priesthood, the bishops are all there to support that, to nourish it, to guide it. If they're not doing it, there's something wrong with their self-understanding. There's something wrong with our training systems. There's something wrong with the lack of women in seminaries and so on. So of the three elements, we've got to get our ecclesiology, our theology right. And it's happening. It is happening. And it's very much the basis of what Pope Francis talks about. So although he can't himself come to the point where he is talking about women on an equal footing in terms of authority and voice, it's open enough that other voices are coming in and moving the conversation along. The second element is synodal praxis or practice, the way that we work with each other, the way that we have pastoral councils, synods and so on, which can, with a different theology, can be creative and brand new. So that Amazon Ecclesial Conference is brand new concept to the Catholic Church. A group of people who are not purely bishops to discuss the topics that need to be discussed for their church. The third element is good governance. So I've said ecclesiology, praxis, governance. Now, we've all got some thoughts on governance, but take note, this isn't the only issue. We need all three to be operating. So we need to talk about good governance, and we had a really good conference in Melbourne a couple of years ago, and there's a book that came out about it. Really professional speakers, a lot of them being lay people who have governance expertise coming out of their ears because they're involved in business and industry. You know, really respectful relationships, paying attention to the science and to, you know, what are the consequences of moving on bad priests? You know, really obvious stuff to us who live out in the real world. So those three elements really need to be operating. And at the moment, sometimes they need a real, something to break the conversation. And that's what happened with the Royal Commission into Institutional Responses to Child Abuse. That forced the church in Australia to have a look at some statistics. You know, we've got some data, it's horrific stuff. We've got it here and we have to do something about it. So I might hand it over to Deb before I lecture too much, but I do want to say we have to recognise we need to grieve that we're not where we want to be, and that this sort of change really hurts. We want it really badly and we want it to happen soon. And we know it can happen. We know that, you know, my husband, he feels like he's not welcome in the parish because his gifts, no one's interested. It's like you're invisible. So you don't have to be a laywoman to be invisible. The laymen feel it too. You know, it breaks your heart. So I feel like part of the message is, yeah, we're angry, but you know, let yourself grieve. and then we'll get creative together, and we know that we need to support each other. I'll pass it on to Deb.
I'm not sure what I can say after that, but grief's a great word, because I've watched it. I've watched it in communities that I've observed when you get a change of parish priest and all of the systems break. Sometimes they don't. Sometimes it's just a lovely, smooth transition, and I've seen that too, and sensitively handled by the guy who's coming in. But equally, I've seen it where it's just a fracture on the ground, and the one that carries that through is the parish itself, the entity that carries the culture and the sense of belonging through different changes in the hierarchy is the parish that's a family. And I think everybody shuffles, that's true. A new guy comes in, there are people who jump ship, there are people who suddenly find a voice, there are people who love him, there are people who can't stand him. It all shuffles and moves, and it's like a shifting sand, but that happens in families too. Kids grow up and their relationships change. So I think we need to see ourselves as women, as the man without the voice, as the people on the pews. We need to see ourselves as the living, breathing church. And the priests that are sent to us are there to serve the people of God. And we need to keep sight of that. Yes, we give them the respect that is due to them, whatever that is. We help them and support them in what their role is. But realistically, the parish and, say, good staff are the ones that are left as they come and go. And that talks to me about the dignity of people in a parish. And we just need to find that way of giving them their voice to contribute to the whole of the church. They're doing their little bit in their own neighbourhood. But to me, that's what this is all about, is how we draw together from Africa and South America and the US, wherever, and Australia, how we contribute in our own little way. And that's just by being who we are and being generous with our time and our talents.
That's a great point, that, you know, we encounter others as themselves with that dignity, and that the human reality of the body of Christ made up of all these different people with different experiences and backgrounds and wisdom. I love it. I've got a couple of questions that I might combine together to finish off our last couple of minutes. So I've been asked about what resources you would recommend for women, but also what can women do to ensure that they have a place, or to try and make a space or a place for themselves within the church. So what resources can they equip themselves with, and what can they do with them?
I mean, I've got some big structural thoughts about, you know, someone like Deb, if they have a pastoral associate network, how valuable would that be? And then you've got theologians advising the pastoral associates on, hey, this Lenten program from the Brisbane Evangelisation Group, which I recommend, brilliant. You know, you could try using that in your parish. And hey, maybe next year you can open your Lenten program with some local thoughts. You know, I find that when you've got really good resources, then once you've done that for a little while and you're comfortable, you think of some, you know, how do we connect that with us here, and what's our voice sound like? And we do that really well in my home parish, in terms of, you know, that decoration, that really says something about us, and putting the kids' art up on the wall of the church, having our own welcome and prayers of the faithful that are our words, and not those, you know, ones that come from the archdiocese and they really clash a bit. There's lots of little things, but then there's big structural things. I go, come on, let's fix our pastoral associate networks. Give them some more money, give them some training, give them some days off. All of that is really important.
Dave, anything further you want to add on what women can do, or how they can resource and equip themselves to do it?
Okay, this is going to sound strange, but I'm on Twitter and I think it's really important, but I'm really focused. I go, okay, when I started off, I thought, I don't want to follow fads. I don't want to hear what, you know, famous people are doing. I follow the Pope, I follow, you know, a famous theologian I might be aware of, my own archbishop, and then I don't want to just follow men. So I watch some conversations because you don't hear other conversations, you just see what's happening with these people. Oh, look, there's a conversation about the synod on the Amazon. That person has made some really good comments. I'm going to follow them. And so then you hear conversations that you don't normally hear. So I hear news from America. I hear news from Latin America. I hear voices that I've never heard before in terms of the LGBT community. I mean, there's not many out where I come from that are really visible. So listening to people online challenges me. And then I see some opportunities. So for example, there's several bishops in Australia who are on Twitter, and they clearly do it every day as a bit of a relax, just like we do. They're sort of chilling out. They'll put up something they think is funny. And I think they're really open and a little bit exposed at the moment. What if, you know, not harassing, but if you put some thought, very careful thought into, do you have an idea that you think the bishop would be interested in? He hasn't read my letters or my emails. Maybe I'll send him a tweet. I don't know, you know, be creative, but also challenge yourself in what you're listening to. Yeah,
great. And I know there's some really great resources coming into the chat, so we'll save the chat and distribute that as well. Debbie, would you like a final word?
All that sticks in my brain is look around and see the amazing people that are doing a wonderful job in listening, in being just caring for others, and in I think we have wonderful people that are at the grassroots of the church, and no matter what's happening at the top, I think we just take heart that real people are involving themselves, and we encourage as many people as possible to just contribute a little bit. If everybody just gives a bit, I think the church continues to breathe. So often you just have to ask people, and you have to encourage, because they won't volunteer.
Yeah, the personal invitation is so important.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, thank you so much. Well, I think you will all agree with me that we have been truly blessed this evening by the great insights and wisdom and experience of Alyssa and Deborah. And we are so grateful that you've joined us to share that with us tonight and to lead us into our own reflections about what synodality means for us and about our own role in a faith community. And we gather here as WATAC as a faith community. And so as we close, I invite you to consider what's been most helpful in this conversation or in this gathering for you, to offer a silent prayer of thanks for that. And if you would like to share that, then you are most welcome to name that in the chat. So just take 30 seconds of quiet to consider what has been most helpful in this session for you. And so we really are grateful for, I think, the hope and the inspiration that's been shared tonight as well. And I say inspiration in its true sense, using the spirit, you know, that the spirit is amongst us as we gather here tonight as community. So if you are adept at using reactions, then I invite you to give a virtual, or you can do these ones, to acknowledge the contribution Alyssa and Deborah have made to our evening tonight. Thank them so much for their contributions for us here.